Welcome to your weekly pulse check with Dr. Dale. How are you people? How are the beautiful people of the world today? Beautiful, of course, beautiful. Hello. You are in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing with the right person. Thank you for being here. I am your host, Dr. Dale. You can call me Dale as long as you call me Dale, or I'm good with that. You can catch us here every week, every Wednesday, 12:15, about 12:15 Eastern Standard Time. So today we got a treat. Yes, 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 yes. What do we talk about here for those that don't know, for those that are new to the conversation? Every week we talk about human resources. We talk about emotional intelligence and how these two amazing tools, human resources and emotional intelligence, helps the people of the world, the people in the workplace, how it can thrive, allow them to thrive at home, at work, in all of their relationships, right? And making them better human beings no matter where they are. So that's what this conversation has always been about. That's what it's about every single week. And this week is no different. This week, I have a treat for you guys. Yes, I do. I have a beautiful person that has become such a beautiful friend inside and out. The conversation, the topic today is about future of leadership, right? You want to future proof your leadership? You're in the right place. You're in the right place. We want to empower, right? Empower belonging for impact. What is belonging? What's that all about? Well, I have an expert here that can tell us all about it, right? We have an amazing person. Her name is Andrea Carter. She's a neuroscience expert, as you can see, building belonging cultures, right? So it's not something that she started yesterday. It is something that she's been doing for years. So with that, I'm going to bring her to the stage and then we can. I'm going to let you just say hi and introduce yourself before
Well,
I just keep going with the definition and whatnot. So, yeah,
you
it's all
bet.
yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the podcast today, Dale. I'm excited to be here today because, we're going to talk about a topic that I believe is not just important, but absolutely critical to the success of any organization. And that is creating cultures of belonging in the workplace. So in today's, rapidly evolving world where the dynamics of workforce are continually changing, and they're changing faster than ever before. Fostering environments where everyone feels like they are respected, included, and specifically valued is really essential for driving innovation, resilience, and overall effectiveness. So, a little bit about myself: I'm an adjunct professor at Adler University, where I specialize in industrial and organizational psychology and institutional leadership. I also have the honor of being an inaugural professor at the Institute of Visionary Leadership and Organizational Health, a program that's being developed in partnership with Fulbright Canada and Fulbright US. This institute is dedicated to equipping leaders across corporate, nonprofit, government sectors with tools and insights to navigate the complexities of the modern workplace. So, we actually launched our first course in November in Vancouver. So, I'm excited to be part of that. Um, the goal is really to start promoting cultures of respect, inclusion, and innovation. So I'll be launching the belonging work in that program. And then in addition to my academic roles, I'm also the CEO and founder of Belonging First, where my team and I focus on developing corporate development and leadership programs. What we do is we measure belonging in the workplace. We apply a proven science-based method, and then we create belonging cultures that truly work. So as Dr. Dale had said, I have 15 years in DEI and executive leadership training. And I think, the biggest piece for me is that I've seen firsthand the transformative impact that a strong culture of belonging can have on individuals and on organizational success. So they really do go hand in hand. And I'm here today really to share some of those insights along with some practical strategies. And my goal for all of you is to help you start implementing some of them right away to make your workplace not just a place where people work, but really they truly belong. So that's my introduction, and thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. How did we meet again, Andrea? I think it was Women Changing the World,
Women
right?
changing the
The
world. That's
world.
right.
Yes, we were both nominated, of course, by different people, and we just met in that community. And I was nominated, she was nominated. We both got to the finalists and different areas, right? And I made it to the finalists, but I wasn't selected. But Andrea was. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. Happy to. So, Women Changing the World is awards that the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, in conjunction with Katie and Peace
Peace.
Mitchell,
Uh-huh.
yeah, um, who are out of Australia. So it's interesting because it's almost well, it's global, which is
It's global.
incredible. And there
Mm-hmm.
were 3,500 women
Women?
approximately, I believe, that were
Yeah.
nominated for this,
Yeah.
and reduced down to, I think all of the cuts were reduced down to awards
Was
to, it was 100 women.
100 and some. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so
And
it
then they
was,
have like how many categories? Like
I
20
think
something
they had
categories, right?
25 or, yeah,
Yeah.
categories.
Yeah.
So I was nominated for four by one of my organizations that I work with over in the UK. And I won innovation and then micro business of the year. And so the innovation award was one specifically for my research and belonging, which is super excited. Um, and then the micro business of the world, that was specifically for my belonging first organization that has really started to make an impact and start driving change so that people understand how to measure belonging, but then also understand the gap between, a lot of organizational surveys are done in a way that only look at the mean. And when we only look at the
Mm.
mean, we're only looking at the averages. And so it actually cancels out the voices of the underrepresented. And so my research really highlighted that, allows that voice to be heard, and then measures the gap between your mean, your underrepresented, and then brings it back together. So,
And when you say the
um,
underrepresented, you mean
so it
what?
depends. Yeah, it kind of depends on how the variables are measured in every organization. So in every organization, you're going to have numerical values that make up, and this is actually kind of where DEI practices are broken. So what I mean by that is they typically only look at men, women, and gender nonconforming. So they try and categorize people into a singular identity. And as we know, we're not just our gender, we're also our ethnicity, we're also our level of leadership, we are also our role, we are also a parent or non parent. And so we have all of these elements. And when we look at the traditional ways that a lot of DEI was brought forward, what it did was it polarized the workplace. So instead of it actually bringing people together, it
It,
polarized people because it
yeah.
focused in on the differences. And
Yep.
so, what this specific survey methodology does is it allows us to actually find out what are the predictors of this organization first, meaning every organization is going to be different. There's organizations out there that have predominantly female led organizations. There's organizations out there that are predominantly people of color driven organizations. And so when we look at all of those elements where people are underrepresented in one given environment is what creates either an in-group or an excluded or ostracized or underrepresented group. And
Yep.
so that is actually one of the big pieces, right? We actually have to understand who are the people that make up our organization first, and what does the in group actually think?
Right. Before we
And
start.
then
Yeah.
before we start doing anything else. And so, what's interesting about the methodology was that by looking at it through the lens of every organization has an in group, out group, it actually allows for us to understand what are the predictors of belonging. So, in
Mm,
some instances, you're going to see that gender is one. In some, you're going to see that sexual orientation or
yeah.
role or level of leadership or years at the organization. It all depends on what the variables are within the organization to start with. And you have to actually want to get to know the organization first to know what
Right.
variables to then
Yeah.
ask and
Yeah.
put forward. And then we've actually measured from a neuroscience perspective first what belonging is. And so now we apply the methodology not only to being able to provide scores for belonging in the workplace, but we can do it with engagement. We can do it with leadership effectiveness. We can do it with, professional development,
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
we can apply the methodology to. So,
And I'm
yeah,
glad what the conversation is about belonging. I'm sure there are some people out there, like I was, that is, what is belonging? What are we talking about?
yeah,
Empowering belonging for impact and how it can future proof your leadership, right? So I got this definition from Cornell University, and it gives a sense, and they have their diversity and inclusion definition up there, and a subsection to that, they
mhm,
have their belonging, what they believe, what they stand for. And
yeah.
they kind of give what and I kind of like it, and I want Andrea to kind of tell me, is this a real definition? Is this in line, right, with what is actually out there? So belonging is the feeling of security and support when there is a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for a member of a certain group. It is when an individual can bring their authentic self to work. When employees feel like they don't belong at work, their performance and their personal lives suffer. Creating a genuine feeling of belonging for all is critical factor in improving engagement and performance. It also helps support business goals. So you tell you the floor is yours, and we can just I'll
Well,
ask some question here and there, but it's all yours.
yeah. So, what's lovely about this definition is that it certainly is a really great foundational starting point. And, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when I really first started investigating belonging, this would have been exactly where I had started from as well. But what's interesting about that is that a lot of these words, everything that's in this definition, is not measurable. We can't actually look at it and be able to say, okay, well, does somebody feel that sense of acceptance? Does somebody feel like they can bring their authentic self to work? And so, the belonging work that I started with, there's really, 6 concepts that have to be understood. So the first concept is looking at what belonging actually is broken down into. How do we measure belonging so that our brain actually experiences it and feels it? And there's actually 5 indicators that you have to have in order for your brain to experience belonging. And the first is comfort, the second is connection, the third is contribution, the fourth is psychological safety, and the fifth is well-being. So you actually saw flavors of that within that definition to start
Wait, are
with.
you gonna break up them a little bit for me? Like you're gonna give
Yes,
a
I
little bit of
will. I will. I'm just giving you a little test, little teaser. So comfort is really, if you think about breaking it down, and we've done this in schools for high school and university students, where comfort is that action of being seen and seeing others. So before I go into all 5 definitions, what you also have to understand, the sixth piece about what makes belonging different than just inclusion or fitting in. The research shows that inclusion and fitting in are actually on a different spectrum. they're at the opposite end. And the reason for that is because inclusion and fitting in says to people that 100% of the responsibility is on you. You have to behave, you have to value, you have to believe, you have to think, you have to act, you have to do all of the things that the in group says you have to do if you want to be part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And belonging is actually a 50-50. So the difference between that is that, for you and I, Dale, I have to honor, I have to see you, I have to be able to have the awareness that what your perception is, what your thoughts are, what your experiences are, what your background is different than mine. And I
Mm-hmm.
have to have that awareness, but I also then have to go into wanting to connect with you. So if you think of typical DEI work, it kind of stays in this comfort space where it's like, okay, so I have this awareness and I get that somebody's different than me and I get that I can see them and I can, have the perception that someone's different, but I don't really care. Do I care? Do I have to care? And it's a really, and I'm saying that facetiously, but I also feel that that's actually one of the places that a lot of organizations get stuck because they put elements out to understand and know, but until you actually connect someone from being in the space of, we're uncomfortable because we don't necessarily know each other. We actually have to move into becoming comfortable with each other by knowing each other. So how do we do that? We actually have to go into the second indicator of belonging, which is connection. And connection is getting to know someone. Connection is knowing and then being known. So it would be me understanding that you have this beautiful gift in emotional intelligence, and all of your research and all of the work that you've done in emotional intelligence is also part of how you help leaders and HR and the workplace succeed. So, you understand that. And then you also wanted to know me and you wanted to know about belonging and you wanted to know about my research. So it's the next step of then evolving from, okay, I have this awareness into, I want to understand you and I want to understand what makes you tick. And I want to understand how your work contributes to my work and my work contributes to your work. And we're actually building something together instead of going this alone and having all of these different silos and these different perspectives. Because if you think of an organization, every function, every role still has a goal. They have a vision. They have something that they are trying to achieve together. And we actually can't do that effectively, just like teams don't actually perform to their optimal level unless teammates get to know each other and
Yeah.
value the importance of being a good teammate. And
Yeah.
so when we look at comfort and then connection, we actually need those pieces because what happens when you go from comfort, which is sympathy, the emotion of sympathy, into connection, which is actually the emotion of empathy. It means that my need to know you and your situation, what's happening in your world, allows me to show up better for you.
Yeah.
And what then allows us to do together is contribute more effectively. And that's the third indicator. So when we look at contribution, the first element of that is being able to evaluate, okay, so we have these differences. We both clearly have something that can collaboratively come together based on our strengths and our values and our beliefs. And
Mm-hmm.
even if we didn't have the same values and beliefs, we have skills and knowledge and attributes that together on this vision forward, we're all aligning with, right?
Yeah.
That's what makes us so powerful as a
Yeah.
team
Yeah.
and as cross-functional teams. And so when we're evaluating other people, instead of automatically looking at them and seeing their differences, it's the
Mm.
switch of then being able to look at it from the perspective of, okay, this is a belonging environment. I'm 50% responsible for you feeling like you belong at this environment, and you're 50% responsible
Percent
for me
responsible for
feeling like
me.
I belong, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so from that, it's also then being able to look at the action of valuing and being valued for those strengths, for those skills, for the education, for the background. And if you think about how many organizations have included people in boardrooms, meetings, insights, and then not taken that second step of actually that contribution being leveraged and used. That's where inclusion also falls apart, because you can bring everybody into that room, but if we're not actually valuing subject matter experts, if we're not
Yeah.
actually valuing where there's perceptions that are different, then this is where we actually fail to account for some of the risks that we will have. It's where we fail to actually develop a product that speaks to the consumer. It's where we fail to be able to actually go into markets and new markets and understand the emotional components, because we're
Would
not actually valuing them.
would you say that that's one of the biggest challenges leaders are facing right now, trying to maintain and incorporate a belonging culture, their
Oh yeah,
perception?
100%. 100%. Because if we look at even if you look at the media, I mean, the media today, we're seeing this more and more, that organizations are coming to the conclusion that DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, are broken. And, you know, I would be the first person to say that they are broken. The research 8 years ago, that's why I started on this quest of belonging, was that it was going to create polarization in the workplace. But
Mm.
I think the element is that you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because while we've seen organizations abandoning, and even Harvard abandoning their efforts completely, there's merit in DEI
Yeah, sure. The
when it's built on a
HR
strong.
certification, they
Yeah,
did the same thing. They got rid of
yeah,
equity.
yeah. And when it's built on a strong foundation, like something that you can measure, like belonging, that is where we're able to prioritize belonging being the foundation that allows the diversity and equity
To flourish.
strategies
To
to
flourish.
create impact, for business growth, for employee empowerment. That's where the strong foundation of belonging is needed to help develop ERGs, cultural elements within the workplace. But I think what's happened is that the separateness, because DEI in many ways is not integrated into cultural practices in many of the organizations that I have gone in and
They have the
worked with.
policies. I'm sure
They
they
have
have
the
the policies.
policies,
They
yeah,
have it on
but
the walls and everything. But ask anybody if they know it, right? Ask anybody if it's
yeah,
embedded into their day to day.
or if it actually feels when they walk into the workplace or they walk into a meeting, if they are valued and they are actually able to influence. And so that's part of that contribution indicator, and what's fascinating too is that the research shows that you can't actually have psychological safety unless you have belonging, because people are not giving that element of 50-50 responsibility and accountability. They're still putting that responsibility and accountability on an individual, rather than the environment also taking responsibility and accountability for their people. So when we look at those elements, your culture, the type of culture that you are creating, is highly dependent on the values and the behaviors that are embedded and practiced, that everybody feels, knows, and buys into. And I would say that that is where many organizations have failed, because they've looked at their DEI as a separate component of their culture. And when
Hmm.
you do that, you actually don't build foundation. You build, okay, well, we have this over here and we have that over there. And it creates confusion, even in the language, in what is practiced, and in what is repeated. And so those elements are really they become a problem, rather than something that can be leveraged for the organization as a whole.
Andrea, can you give us a specific example where fostering a sense of belonging on a team in an organization can lead to a significant positive outcome? Like maybe just one instance or something.
Yeah, so I've worked in 8 different industries, about 100,000 employees have been impacted by the belonging work that I'm doing now. And so for me to pull out just one, I'm going to pull out one that's very common. So
Yes.
I would say it's the most common one that I have seen across the board, in all organizations, and it'll bring back in the other two indicators that we haven't gotten to yet.
Yes. I was gonna say,
We'll be talking
you're
about
missing too
three.
much.
So when we look at an example of this, I would say the biggest example that I often see is with teams who, especially in global organizations. So one of the things that global organizations often try and do is they try and influence how the region of operation is doing marketing, is doing, attracting new markets,
Yeah.
how they're moving into different cultural elements. And as we know, when we look at the different ethnic backgrounds across the world, we've had incredible growth across the globe of differences. And when we look at some of these markets are in need of support. And in many cases, what's happening is that people are falling short of actually being able to speak to certain markets or certain new customer groups because they don't actually understand them.
Relate to them. They can't relate to them.
There's yeah, and across the board, I will say that I've seen this in every single organization. So you have a predominant group of people that are leading these teams. And then you have subject matter experts that are coming in to inform how the decisions are being made. And then you also have your consumer data that's coming in that is meant to also inform how the decisions are being made. I will say across the board, when you don't have belonging as a foundation, the subject matter experts, the people who are from the culture, the data that is out there is actually being ignored. Why is it being ignored? Because what's happening is that people think, oh, well, status quo, this is what we did before, this is what we'll do again. We'll just repeat it. And it'll work in this industry, it'll work in this market, it'll work with these people. That's not how people work. And so when we look at intersectional elements of identity, this is one of the missing components that when people don't understand that we are not just a gender, remember how we started off, we're not just a gender, we're not just an ethnicity, we're not just, all women don't think the same. We don't all have the same aspirations.
You
We
know how
can't
many
just be
people out
clumped
there will
into.
argue with you with that? All women do think the same. They're the same way.
So, but these are the things, right? And so we can't actually get into the hearts and minds and trust of our consumers if our workplace doesn't also have that. And so if you look at that practice, because that practice I would say is the most common across all industries, and it doesn't even have to be a new market that you're trying to get into. It could also just be that you have to course correct. Maybe you're still struggling with, supply chain elements within your workplace, but you're not actually listening to the people who are on the floor. You're not actually listening to the people who are in the bottling plants or in the plants themselves that are creating the product. So there's all of these places that we're not listening because we're not valuing the contribution of the people that we're paying to be in this workplace. And so when we think about that and we think about
Yeah.
the cost of turnover, when we think about the cost of an employee who's disengaged, when we think about the cost of what happens when you have maybe just one, two toxic people on your team and you're trying to move something forward, you're trying to make a decision, and the predominant amount of time is being spent on how we're going to work around the people who are going to say no or who aren't going to listen. It is one of the most ineffective practices that is happening right now in the workplace across the globe. So when we look at that, let's circle back into the 5 indicators now. Let's get back to this.
Yeah.
Um, when people are valued, when people are allowed to influence, and their insights are allowed to contribute to a decision being made, what ends up happening is that you actually increase fulfillment within an employee. And that fulfillment is what allows people to then thrive and continue to engage, and also continue to feel motivated and show up and want to do more. Because think about it, if you've given your contribution numerous times and nobody takes what you've said into
Said,
account,
right, nothing at all.
you stop talking.
Right.
So employee
You get
silence comes from being shut down. It's learned helplessness, which isn't the right word. You know, if you hear that word, don't think of it as like the negative of like you're helpless. It's
no,
that
yeah,
the in-group has decided that what you are trying to share and the importance of what you are trying to share is not actually valued. And
yeah,
so when it is valued and you are fulfilled and you do feel motivated, you will continue to do things for people, even at the cost of potentially, you know, your time off, or you make things work. You think, okay, well, I can make a difference here, and I am making a difference, and that's being valued. And so what happens then is that my difference is then accepted. My insights are then accepted. And when you look at psychological safety, that's actually the predominant foundation of psychological safety. And so
yeah.
the insight of acknowledgement of the of being accepted and accepting the value of other insights and identities, then what happens is that we actually start to reflect, and we start to be more accountable for our behaviors. We start to
Mm.
be more accountable for how we show up. We start to offer trust to other people that we typically wouldn't give trust to. And what's interesting about trust is that trust isn't created by you giving it to me. Trust is created by me giving it to you, and then you giving it back to. I
Back
have
to
to
me.
go first. I have to go first. So that psychological safety is a really interesting thing, because you know, when we're creating these spaces of that are meant to be psychologically safe, you actually have to have a 50-50 partnership where people are reflecting on their own behaviors and how they're giving trust and how they're creating trust, so that they then start understanding how they can be responsible and reliable and respectful. So what's fascinating to me is that I always hear, this is another thing that I always hear in the workplace, well, when are they going to respect my needs or my wishes or what's different about me? And you start to see that respect change when these indicators are present. And
Mm-hmm.
then when everyone starts to understand, wait a second, I'm accountable and responsible first for you. And as we start to change that, it also changes the dynamic of the workplace.
So if I get this to make sure I understand this, so then
Yeah,
I'm starting with me. Each person, each employee, each manager, everybody's starting with themselves before they start pointing fingers. Hey, am I giving this? Is that what you're saying? So that way we meet halfway?
that's right.
Ooh. But I've been in this company a long time, Andrea, and I've been giving 110%, and they haven't been noticing, you know? And I think I'm done. I think I'm done. What do you say to that? I'm done.
Well, and then if that is the comment, then it is a matter of looking at, okay, so where is the disconnection here? Where have we not cared for? And this goes into well-being. Where have we not cared for the needs and the skills and the educational background of that individual? Where have we not done due diligence on that element to authentically be compassionate and understand what each individual is bringing to that organization? And I think that's one of the places where, when you have an in group and you have an individual, who's being told that they have to fit in. That is also where, remember, fitting in is 100% up to one individual versus the
Individual.
whole group.
Right.
And so what happens then is that in that situation, that is where the in group completely overlooks the value of the individual. So comfort, connection, and contribution, those three pieces, when those three pieces aren't in play, we actually can't get to the psychological safety and the well-being of individuals, which means that we're consistently behind the eight ball in how we're actually showing up and supporting that individual who has given 100% and nobody has seen it.
I've been that example that you gave earlier,
Mm-hmm.
I actually been in that position
Mm-hmm.
where I've had a CEO from a previous company that we were working on a project and it was
Mm-hmm.
for the audit, and they had a CEO, that a CFO that was not a good people manager, and people just
Mm-hmm.
kept on leaving them and leaving them and leaving them, and we needed to kind of work with her to get this audit and this information for this audit done. And he was like, just work around her, just go to the other person, the director of of billing or whatever. And I was like, because he knew, or that we couldn't work with this person, and this person was refusing to do whatever it is that we needed them to do. And I was like, how much pain and time and that caused to even go and
Oh,
sit down.
yeah.
And it was just mind boggling that
Yeah.
they were working around this person just because they know the way this person was. And that took away so much from the team, and that made more people leave.
Yeah. Because it's exhausting. It's actually, so if you think about, so again, going back to the neuroscience of it, so when you have people that only see their own goals, their
Mm.
own viewpoints, that
Mm-hmm.
are only seeing, we're going to get to this through my
My
way.
way.
Yeah. What ends up happening is that the brain can't actually operate in a natural way. And so it 64, they say between 64 and 67% of your brain power per day ends up going towards dealing with that individual rather than effectively working towards the goal. So if you think of a team, depending on how big your team is, and you have one individual that is consistently only valuing their own viewpoint, you have a whole team of people that are operating at about 30 to 35% of their brain power. Now, you tell me, how innovative, how creative, how effective can we be at moving work forward if all of us are only working at 30% of our brain power? Right? Like these are the things that I think so many people underestimate. And for a long time people would say to me, well, Andrea, it's amazing, we can now measure this. How do we connect it to our business outputs and goals and all of those things?
Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
is a direct relationship. I mean, we show that now in our reporting, but
Right.
at the beginning of the research it was like, so you have a team, like let's just talk about this from a very basic perspective. You have a team of 10, and if you had a team of 10 who was even operating at, let's say, 70%, that team of 10 is going to get you further than a team of 10 that's only operating at 30%. Always. Like, that math is just simple math, right? So when we're looking at these pieces, and the same is true for sports, the same as, you see these elements. Why do we have Cinderella teams? We've watched the Olympics. It's, we've just closed, and you see teams that fell apart. Well, the teams that fell apart, how well did they create that space of belonging?
Mm.
How well were they
Yeah.
really functioning together? Those Cinderella teams, they come out of nowhere because they know each other, they value each other, they are able to influence each other in the moment. you can have a player going to one side of a field and the other player sees them and knows them and values them and shows up for that player so that they're scoring that try or that goal or
Right.
whatever that is. And you can't do that. You can't
Yeah.
do that if you don't know your people.
Yeah.
You
So
can't
can we
do
take
that if
this?
you, yeah, please go for it.
No, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. We can't do it if go where you were saying. We're going with it.
Well, I was going to say, we can't do that if we don't create that initial comfort with each other of saying, okay, you and I are partners in this. You're my team. I have to know you and value you and care about you, accept you, see your skills, value all of those pieces, right? So that's all those five indicators of belonging are all built into those pieces. So, back to that element of Cornell's definition, it's a great foundational piece, but we also
But
have to be
just
able to
more.
have. There's more. There's
What
way more
more?
to it. Way more to it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. What if we take this because people are people wherever people are. There's
Yeah.
people are people. So what if we take this from the workplace to home, to
Mhm.
church, to any group that we're a part of? Is it one and the same?
100%. I mean, if you think of every single, so this is always such a great question, and certainly I see it in the community, you see it in families. Let's look at it from a family perspective, because I think that that's
Yeah.
a really easy one that all of us
Yeah.
can
Relate
understand.
to. Yeah.
Um, so imagine that you have a family where there are 3 kids, 4 kids, 5 kids, whatever it is, right? 2 kids, one
Yeah.
kid. Um, when you look at the sibling dynamic, typically speaking, what you see is that one sibling will try and control other siblings. And it depends on, birth order certainly has a factor in this, but it also often comes down to who has more education or who makes more money or who has more time or, who had to be a support versus who got to be a driver. And all of these factors, this is why we can all come from the same family and yet have completely
Completely
different
different
values,
experiences. Yeah.
completely different experiences. And the thing is that a lot of families don't understand how to create belonging. And what that does is it allows the person who's either the loudest or the one that doesn't fit in or the one who is different to consistently be ostracized
Right.
or excluded. And so that one person who maybe has the ear of mom or dad more, or maybe had more money or whatever the governing element that the family values the most. And in a lot of families value money or education as one of those competing factors. And so what happens is that the person who is outplaced, the person who is excluded, the person who doesn't think the same, who doesn't show up the same, who behaves differently,
Yeah.
those are the people that are pushed out that are typically not paid attention to. So just like that employee who is undervalued, who is underappreciated, who consistently shows up and then is finally like, you know what, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. That's what we're seeing within families. And that's what we're seeing now more and more of. So, how do we create that belonging? It's being able to look at the difference of behavior. It's being able to look at the difference of perception. It's being able to look at all of those things and still see that that person has value and that they are as important as every other member of the
Of the
family.
family. Yeah.
And when we don't do that, that's where we create these hierarchies. And the hierarchies within families are actually what destroy families. And we see that in corporate as well, because then one person's priorities and needs drive everyone else's priorities and
Priorities and
needs.
needs. Ooh, that's a good quote. I'll take that's a good quote.
Yeah. So it's,
Yeah, that
it's,
was
and
really good.
we see that in families all the time. And And so being able to offer compassion and consideration, and even though it might be hard, creating comfort in being able to say, okay, I don't understand it, but help me understand it. Help me understand what's important to you. Help me understand why, we can't all, and not everyone's priority can be the number one priority.
Yeah.
But
All the
how do we
time.
ensure all the time? But how do we ensure that everyone's priorities are still seen and known and valued and accepted and cared about? Those five pieces are pieces that can actually shift the way that family dynamics is working. And again, it then means that we have to be 50% and 50% responsible and accountable for all of those people in the family. And you have to be able to be willing to do the work to make that happen. So, depending on the family dynamics, it might be easier to do it in an organization than in a family.
Or
But
a few
but I
years of
do,
therapy or something.
right? But I do fundamentally believe that in families, when families start to understand those concepts, they can meet each other halfway. And the conflict that exists, the polarization that is there, but everyone has to go first, and everyone has to put out that willingness to show up and be 50-50. And that piece, that status quo piece, when you have certain individuals in the family who always want to be their priorities over everyone else's, that's where it's tricky in those family dynamics. Yeah.
Give us one or even two strategies that leaders can actually use to dismantle, barriers that prevent certain groups from feeling a sense of belonging, from feeling like they're outside.
Yeah, so I would say the first thing that you want to look at is wherever you have a discomfort, wherever as a leader, wherever you feel like you don't understand, instead of that being your weakness, instead of believing that you have to be all knowing of all things, because I think that this is something that a lot of leaders fall into. And a lot of leaders also fall into, well, this worked before, so it'll work again. That's not always the case. One of the things that I would say lean into is getting comfortable with seeing the difference and then wanting to know how to understand that. Because if we want to shrink the gap between what is polarized right now, what we need to be able to do is go from this place of awareness really into this place of wanting to understand and be able to empathize. So, for example, with that person that you were saying, well, I have given 100% for years, nobody is seeing me. Start with those people that feel like they are the most difficult, they are the most challenging, they are the ones that push back the most, because at the
Mm.
end of the day, the people that are pushing back are the ones that are not being recognized for their skill and their value. And so, oh, go
And
ahead.
they're the loudest. They're the
And
loudest.
they're the
So
loudest.
everybody is listening to them, even, the newcomers and everything. So get to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So start there, because when if we're not looking at those elements of understanding and wanting to know, okay, why is this so important to this person? What is it that I'm missing? That
Mm.
question, what can we do with this information that can actually make it better for everyone? Those questions are the questions that we have to start thinking of differently. Because when we look at the people that are making noise, they're not making noise because, something small has happened to them. They're making noise because it's been repetitive elements that have happened to them where they have not been seen, they have not been known, they have not been heard, they have not been, able to be valued. And that's where, if you can connect with those people and even just sit down and have a conversation and say, tell me, what is it that I'm missing here? Tell
Mhm.
me, how do I understand what you need better? Tell
Mhm.
me, how can I reflect on the influence that you've been trying to bring and put it towards our common vision or goal?
Yeah.
That changes the conversation in a
Yeah.
heartbeat, in a heartbeat, in a heartbeat.
I agree 100%. I actually had that experience, and when I came in, I was the only one that I said, "Would have anybody ever talked to this girl?"
Mhm.
No, she's always making a noise. She's always having an issue with something, you know? And I said, well, at least talk to her and see what it is and figure it out. And I sat down and I said, all right, fine, I have a conversation with her. I sat down and I have a whole like a good hour or two conversation with her. And she's been there for like 7 years. I'm a new manager, and she's like, "Do you know all the time I've been here, all this time I've been talking and telling them what they've been doing, not only to me but other people, new hires and all this stuff that been coming in. Nobody has ever actually sat down and have a meet. They called me over the phone while I was driving home and kind of got my take on that particular issue, but it was so much bigger than that, and nobody actually called me into an office, sat down, looked me into the eyes, offered
Yeah,
me some water, and let's have a conversation. She said, "You're the
yeah.
very first one," and she said, "Unfortunately, you are little too late."
Mm,
I was heartbroken
yeah,
that that it got to that point, but it was too late for her because she already gotten another offer. This was her last day. She didn't care, but she did me that solid because I pretty much sweep her off her feet when I called her. I'm like, please, can you please come in? I'm new here. Kind of made her feel sorry for me, and she came in and she's like, you feel like you seem like you're gonna be a good manager, so I hope they see that. And that
yeah.
was that. And that kind of, it hurt.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And how many people are walking around hurt right now? I think that's the other piece around
Mhm.
it too.
Mhm.
When we look
Mhm.
at conflict, conflict isn't created because you know you just want to you just want to piss people off that day. Right? Like, we don't get up in the morning and think, I want to piss you off today. It's not how we work. Um,
No.
but we go in and you're somehow either criticized or devalued or virtually unseen. And little things, it's always the little things that continue to add up. Not
The
knowing
little
your
things.
employees' names or how to pronounce their names.
Yes.
That showed up in the research. That was so high in the research that actually came in under the comfort element. And it's fascinating because when you look at these factors and these indicators, simple things like giving people clear expectations.
My
Um,
goodness. Yes.
that is a component
They don't
of
know what they're
comfort,
supposed to be. What do you want from them?
right? They don't know. It's like, how many people go to work and they don't even have a job description, or they don't even know exactly what they're meant to do. They don't know what the vision or what the mission is that their team is meant to deliver. And so then they're constantly trying to provide something that they can't provide because it's not
They
made
don't
clear
know.
to them. And then they consistently can't meet the expectation of whoever the leader is. And so all of these pieces, the small pieces of like knowing somebody's name or being able to pronounce it properly, and knowing, that they are meant to, this is the expectation set for you. These are these small things, and it was fascinating. I recently just was a parent chaperone for the Ontario Summer Games, specifically for Ontario volleyball, and it was fascinating because the organizers did not give any of the parent chaperones clear expectations. There was no specific element of, this is what we'd like you to do for this week. They didn't even talk to us at many situations where they left
Yeah.
the parent they couldn't get parent chaperones, and then they only had two of us. And what was fascinating was that then they ignored us. And I thought, wow, this is the first time in years that I have not been included and not been part of a team to actually understand what my
What my
expectations
expectations
are.
are.
And it was really a valuable experience, because in seeing that, you could also see where that was replicated through certain teams and through certain leaders that didn't care about team dynamics, that didn't care about team environment. And it changed, how people showed up. And something as simple as not knowing what was expected of me was really something that allowed me to have that personal understanding of what makes someone
Yeah.
comfortable. And comfort actually starts with really having that understanding of what is expected of us. And so then we can model that, and then we can actually create those other outcomes of getting to know people and getting to know the work, and all of that snowballs from there. So um
Did you see
these
in your research different did you guys separate it by race, by years of experience as a leader, like those kinds of things?
Yeah, so you still, when you look at variables of human indicators,
Mm-hmm.
you still have to go through, your prototypical one. So role, function, level of leadership, gender, ethnicity, or race, depending on what country of origin you're working from. You still have to look at elements of ability. You still have to look at elements of neurodiversity. You still have to look at elements of dependence. You still have to look at all of these factors. Languages
Languages.
come up
Oh,
so often
yeah.
because in certain environments, imagine that you have an environment that predominantly speaks, well, we can use the French, English, Spanish, Italian, German, whatever the
Yeah,
dominant
yeah.
language is. So imagine that you have everyone speaking one language, but then there's a core group of people who have power that are speaking in a different language. That
Right.
actually can automatically create a
Oh, a
huge
whole
division and
polarization. Yep.
polarization.
Yeah.
And so language is very polarizing. And a lot of people just like understanding what language they need to speak in. Or, what's interesting about language, and I know this from my own experience, at one point I was trilingual, and so when you're speaking in different languages and you have to think of the word, and not all words
Of
translate. So
course.
like in
Right.
Italian, for example, there's no word for leadership. There's a word for boss, but there's no word for leader. And those words are very different. And
Yeah.
so when we're thinking about our language, one of the reasons DEI failed in many ways was because the language was hard, and too hard for it to translate across
Fixed. Yeah.
into
Yeah.
each
Fixed.
language,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the interpretation of what that word was often changed the behavior and application of it. And so
Gotcha.
when we look at all of these factors, one of the elements where our survey analysis does not provide enough information on who the people are is that when we're only looking at a mean, and even when you look at regression analysis or predictive analysis, we're only using very additive
Like
models. So
mixed
we're
model.
going
Yeah.
to use I'm a woman and I'm white, or I'm a woman and I'm of color, or I'm a woman and I'm gay, or we have all of these different pieces that I think people put together and don't necessarily understand how that changes their in grouping or their out
Grouping.
grouping.
Right. Right.
And so when you look at those predictors, you don't stop after you've looked at what are the predictors of belonging. You then look at how the variables are impacting each other. So we then
Yeah.
run multiplicative analysis, which starts from, your regression to indicate what are the predictors. So let's imagine that predictors are gender, ethnicity, level of leadership. Let's say those are the top three predictors. You then have to understand, okay, so which of those identities is actually creating your bigger in-grouping,
Okay.
out-grouping? So you can measure that. You can do that through
For that
mediated.
specific group
For
that
that,
you're
because
specific.
it always goes back to whatever the group is that you're working with. So it'll never transfer entirely from one,
To the other,
organization to the
to the
next.
other, never.
And,
Yeah.
you know, back to language, it could be that gender, language, and years of being at the organization are actually your three top predictors of belonging or of engagement or of leadership effectiveness.
Yeah.
And so, if you're not measuring these things and looking at it from a multiplicative perspective, where
Yeah.
each of those small predictors actually impacts somebody's ability to feel like they belong, to feel like they can engage, to feel like they are important.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so those pieces are multiplicative rather than just singular.
Makes sense.
So that's what our analysis does, and
Oh
then we
my
produce
goodness.
reports around it, and then
True.
the tactics of
We're gonna have to come.
belonging help move it
You're
all
gonna have to come
forward.
back. We're gonna have to do a part two, maybe a part three. This conversation was amazing for me. I got a few people that popped in and made their comments. I do want to ask you one question before we get out of here. In
Mhm.
less than a minute, give us from your heart, what is belonging in a sentence, in a word, so that way that one person that just stopped in can just hear that and that was for them. What is that?
Yeah. So belonging is the ability to be accountable and responsible for your environment and yourself through seeing someone's differences, getting to know them, valuing them, accepting them, and caring about them so that you create a space where everyone can thrive.
I can add nothing to that. I'm not even going to add nothing to that. I love it. Thank you so much for this, for coming, for accepting, for connecting, and for being a sister, and for, being, connecting with me and even having this conversation. Andrea, is definitely not going to be the last. And allow me to interrupt your vacation.
Well,
So,
thank you, Dale, for having me. And thank you for having these conversations. These are conversations that are so important. And
muy
when we talk
importante.
about the future of leadership and what
Yes.
the direction is that we're going in, the work that you're doing is foundational and so important. And I just feel so honored and so grateful that our paths have crossed, that we've been able to collaborate, and that we're able
Yeah.
to do things together.
Yeah, first of many for sure. If anybody's interested in getting in touch with Andrea, your LinkedIn, right? Or
Yes.
your website. You want to share that?
Yeah, so belongingfirst.com is my website. And LinkedIn, it's just Andrea D. Carter on
Andrea.
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Wonderful.
Thank you
Thank you all.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for popping into this week's of Pulse Check with Dr. Dale, and I'll see you guys here same time next week for